The significance of an art movement can often be judged by the reactions to it. We've already seen that take place with Impressionism and the very powerful reactions that come along in the form of post-Impressionism. That's going to be even more true in terms of abstract expressionism, which is going to create very powerful reactions. Among those reactions, we will find pop art, and I do have an image in the center of the screen right now, which qualifies as pop art. We also have minimalism, and we have post-painterly abstraction. Post-painterly abstraction refers to, and it's just one of many names that may refer to this group of painters who continue to use abstraction, but without the angst of the artist. In order to understand some of these reactions, I think I'd like to turn to minimalism first, which is the most direct in terms of the response of artists to abstract expressionism. I promise we'll come back to pop. Minimalism is a style that develops in the 1960s. It specializes in being impersonal, and it even surpasses pop art in that area. With minimalist art, it's difficult to relate the object that you're looking at to any experience or to any emotion. What the artist, in fact, wants you to do is to focus on the object itself. It is therefore devoid of content, of subject, of feeling, and perhaps most importantly of the marks of the artist's hands, and therefore of the experience and the emotion of the artist, which was so firmly associated with abstract expressionism. Okay, we have on the screen right now three minimalist pieces. I think we're going to take a look at the work F3119, which is by Donald Judd. And I would like you to notice that, in fact, it doesn't even have a title. It is an untitled work, and also it has no pedestal. Judd is the easiest, I think, of the minimalists to work with and to understand because he's working with simple geometrical forms that are ordered, nice and neat and tidy in a mathematical way, kind of rigorously balanced with a purity of form to each of the component parts. And I do want to stress that these, in Judd's work, often do come packaged with component parts. Sometimes Judd's work, consequently, is referred to as gestalt, meaning you have to take the parts to create the whole, that there is a wholeness that is more essential than any of the individual parts. You have to take, in this case, the rectangular brass boxes that have tops and bottoms made out of plexiglass, and you, the viewer, have to put these together into a coherent form. They're not actually ordered by the artist, they're ordered by the viewer into a total and complete whole. This form of art is so extreme, there are some folks who've referred to it as anti-art, stripping everything away that we have come to associate with quote-unquote high works of art. Judd and many other minimalists also, not in this piece particularly, but also may engage in the use of new materials, particularly industrial materials that we again would not associate with high art. The piece by Judd that you do have in your book allows for the viewer to actually kind of see the interior of the brass rectangles, almost as if to view into the object itself. So you focus on the object, not on the artist. For Judd, in fact, he does not actually create these. He sends them off. He is the guy who does the designs. So in that sense, it is also related to idea art or to concept art. The important quality here is the idea, or you could simply say the design in the head of the artist. Okay, upper left, that is another piece that was created by Donald Judd, just to give us a reinforced idea of what Judd's materials look like. Lower left is a piece that was made by Saul LeWitt, or made by his team and the team of the Philadelphia Museum of Art. When I take students to the museum for our American lecture, this is one of the places we end up so that we can actually get a first-hand encounter with minimalist art. This is called, on a blue ceiling, 8 geometric figures, and it was created in the 1980s. It is another example of minimalism in terms of the purity of the form and the geometric shapes that are components that, again, the viewer adds into a unified whole. It has no pedestal, certainly. In fact, it's kind of hard to find because it is on the ceiling. This particular work also quite clearly flows over into concept art or idea art, because when the Philadelphia Museum purchased the idea, and that is what they did, they purchased the design for this, and it came along with a set of instructions. Sol LeWitt himself did not put the painting on the ceiling. He sent over some assistants, and they worked with some Philadelphia Museum of Art assistants in order to create this based upon the directions of the artist, which included the exact color to be used in the composition. The Philadelphia Museum of Art then owns the idea, the design. It is site specific to this hallway, but if the museum had another hallway that was exactly the same, they would have the right to paint this out, to move the design, and to recreate it in that other installed space. Okay, this is what Sol LeWitt has to say about concept art. So he's thinking about his creations perhaps less as minimalist and more as conceptual or concept art. Okay, quote, in concept art, the idea or concept is the most important aspect of the work. All planning and decisions are made beforehand, and the execution is a perfunctory affair. Okay, the creation of this is not important enough for Sol LeWitt to show up for. It was important that he, in fact, had the idea to do it. And the notion of concept art, the movement of concept art, wedged within minimalism, we can trace all the way back to Marcel Duchamp. Minimalist art is linked or related to a number of other styles, and in the 70s, in the 80s, it becomes, I'm going to say, kind of messy, in fact, in talking about these works of art because they don't fit into distinct categories. The forms themselves kind of overlap. There are, for example, related or linked to minimalist art, examples of earth art, and one of the examples, upper left, F31 52, the pretty famous spiral jetty by Smithson. The simplicity of this, the rigor of this, the geometry of this is linked to minimalism. At the same time, it's placed on the earth, and it often has its own category, and that is earth art. Nevertheless, because it does sit on the earth and is subject to the moves of nature and weather and the seasons, it's also referred to as process art because it changes over time. In addition, the one that's on our upper right, which is work, it's called Running Fence. It was created by Christo and Jean-Claude in the 1970s. It's one of his famous pieces. It is clearly simplified in nature and is linked to minimalism, but it too is placed on the earth, so we can call it earth art. I think with Christo, though, it also qualifies as performance art, because he and a team come in and construct this, sometimes very dramatically. In addition to that, it is an installation. It is site-specific to the landscape. This happens to be Southern California, so that this is associated with a number of different movements within art, all of them stemming from minimalism, and as I said, kind of getting just a tiny bit messy. And in all of these, you can argue the concept, the idea, is the prime motivation for the work of art. Okay, one last thing to mention is Lin's The Wall, which is located at the bottom. The full title, the Vietnam Veterans Memorial, simply wouldn't fit on my slide. So we're going to call it the wall. This is minimalist in form. It is also earth art in that it is sunk into the earth. In addition to being linked to those movements, it doesn't fit easily into either one of them because it conveys an additional element of content or emotion. Those of you who visited the wall know exactly what I'm talking about. And therefore, it is linked to post-minimalism as well. Eva Hesse is considered to be a post-minimalist. It is, of course, possible. That's her on the right. That's one of her works in our book, 3119A on the left. And just looking at the object on the left, I think you can fairly easily see that it is possible to relate this to minimalism with the simplified geometric form. The limited color, neutral colors that are being introduced. And we're also going to see in the next example that she repeats units, repeats shapes within the forms that she creates. However, in addition to that, in her 6-year career, she adds emotional content, making the works very personal. So she doesn't comfortably fit into pure minimalism. Her objects also seem to be softened. The forms themselves seem to be linked perhaps in a way to process art, but to softened materials, sometimes organic materials that can flow and change. Also non-traditional materials that, as we'll see more accurately in a moment, may in fact be associated with females traditionally. The piece that we're looking at right now, Hang Up, maintains its abstract form, but I would like to suggest that it also conveys an emotional quality. It is an empty frame hanging on a wall. It could be a museum wall, a gallery wall. It's a well-crafted frame, but nevertheless it's disturbing because there's absolutely nothing in it. This is counterintuitive and it is disturbing to the viewer. For me, when I look at this, I see that I think it's latex cord hanging down. I also read that as something that is threatening. Works like this, I do believe, are reflections of the personal experience that Eva Hesse had in her lifetime. She had a life that truly does qualify as tragic. She was born a Jew in Germany, and this is Germany of the Nazis. As a young child, she will be placed into the home of a Christian family. She will eventually be able to come to the United States with her parents, but her parents, particularly her mother, are going to have difficulties adjusting to life here and to a lowered income here. The mother is going to, when Eva is only 10 years old, actually commits suicide after the parents divorce and the father remarries. Mom's going to do this by jumping out of a window. Eva Hesse is so traumatized by this that she goes into therapy and remains in therapy for the rest of her life. Her own marriage will end in divorce, partly prompted by, we can tell from looking at her diary, a sense of competition between herself and her husband in terms of the gender roles that artists were playing and playing out in the United States. Then, when she finally is making success in her own career, she's going to be diagnosed with a brain tumor. The brain tumor will take her life at the age of 34. She's going to work very feverishly before she dies, however, producing, a reasonable body of work. So if you ask Eva Hesse what her work is about, and she was asked, this is what she said: "If I can name the content, it is the total absurdity of life." So these are in many ways a document of the artist's worldview and her state of mind. The work that we're looking at right here, I believe, was done, the next one was done the year before she died. So let's take a look at that. Okay, the one on the left, row piece, It's post-minimalist. It also qualifies as process art. It is literally made of rope. It also shows the chaos of living, as perhaps the one on the right, a similar piece by Eva Hesse, rather, would also do. It kind of stretches and drips and it tangles. It suggests a randomness to fate, that you have no control over your destiny, and that it is actually futile to try to control your own destiny. Eva Hesse, in her images, then, has introduced a powerful personal expression. She's also upgraded the use of fabric or fiber as a material in works of art. Fiber has traditionally been associated with women's work, with sewing, with weaving, perhaps with embroidering. Here, Eva Hesse has upgraded it to a high art form that now is hung in museums. A word about the process portion of this. Because gravity acts on the rope piece, the one on the left, it is also going to change over time. The fiber is going to loosen, it's going to lengthen, and the shapes themselves are actually going to alter. So again, it's messy in terms of categorizing the artists of the 20th century in a particular pigeonhole. That's going to remain true for the future. Our next talkie will pick up with another artist, Magdalena Abakanowicz, and a new style. And that style will be Neo-Expressionism. Abakanowicz is going to continue working in fiber art and infuse it with even greater emotion than Eva Hesse did.